I was a detective. I did some undercover work in a street crimes unit. I was a corporal on the street, so acting supervisor from time to time.
Okay, and in fact, when this incident took place on January 13th of 2014, indeed you were a corporal at that point, correct?
Yes, sir.
And as a corporal, tell me what your duties would be.
If the sergeant was there, which on that particular day he was, my job was just to provide assistance to him with anything he needs, basically like an assistant manager.
But if not, you would be in a supervisory role, is that fair to say?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Now, you also worked as a detective,
Yes.
so certainly you've had training in interview techniques.
Yes, sir.
Tell the court a little bit about your training.
Well, I've had advanced interview techniques. I've had several interview classes. I can't remember the name of them off the top of my head, but I've had probably 3 weeks worth of interview training.
Okay. And would you agree or disagree that during your many years in law enforcement, you've had occasion to take statements from witnesses or people that potentially could be witnesses to various crimes?
Yes, sir.
Both serious crimes, right?
Yes.
And maybe something that might be termed more petty crimes.
Yes, sir.
And have you had occasion to interview or be at a scene where you're going to interview multiple potential witnesses?
Yes, sir.
And so you're certainly aware of the different techniques that you should use when dealing with a large crowd of witnesses.
Yes.
Is it fair to say, too, in your career that you've dealt with situations that might be traumatic for potential witnesses?
Yes, I have.
Now, let's talk a little bit about January 13th of 2014. What was your assignment at that point?
I was working road patrol in the Wesley Chapel area.
As a corporal?
Yes, sir.
And how do you become involved in the call to the Cobb Theater in Wesley Chapel?
I heard a call for a possible active shooter at the theater.
And when you hear that sort of call, what is the protocol? How are you to respond there?
Go directly to the scene, and if it's still active, run to the sound of the gunfire and stop the threat.
Okay. And is it fair to say that you went as quickly as you could?
Yes.
In fact, would you agree or disagree that you headed there so fast it smelled like your car was burning up?
That's correct.
Before we talk a little bit more about the theater, why did you leave Pasco County and why are you working for Tampa Police Department?
Tampa has a larger tax base, so there's a lot more opportunities for advancement. There's more people working there, so you have more help. And it's just, for me, it was a career move to broaden my horizons, make more money, have more backup, things like that.
Okay, and so do you agree or disagree that it was a choice that you made?
Yes, sir.
Would you agree or disagree with me that as a professional law enforcement officer, it was your opinion?
Object. That's obviously leading. He's been doing it.
I said
Some of
agree
those
or
I let
disagree,
go.
Judge.
Well, that's still, he needs to reform his question, Judge.
Well, leading is you, and then I leave it open. If I say agree or disagree, certainly it doesn't beg the answer or suggest an answer.
This is direct examination. This is for him to get information from the witness, not to feed information to the witness and determine whether or not she agrees or disagrees.
I appreciate
He's
it.
testifying for her.
Judge, I appreciate it that the prosecutor may have a different stylistic approach to her direct examinations. However, it's proper under the rules for me to ask a question that does not suggest an answer. It gives her a choice, yes or no. There's nothing wrong with it.
As long as it doesn't suggest the answer within the question as well, I'll allow it.
Okay. Do you agree or disagree with me that as a professional law enforcement officer, you felt that Pasco County Sheriff's Office was understaffed at the time?
On patrol, yes.
And so therefore, one of the reasons for your, is it true that one of the reasons for your transfer was because of that?
Objection to relevance, Judge.
Well, Judge, I don't want the prosecutor to get up here and attack her motive for testifying now that she's with a different police department about what went on in the theater. Frankly, the subject matter deals with a witness contamination, and how part of it has to do with the understaffing problems that the department had, so I think it's relevant in this case.
I'm gonna,
Ken, you can answer the question.
Can you ask it again? I
Yep.
apologize.
One of the reasons that you chose to left, is it true that one of the reasons you chose to leave the department, Pasco County, and go to Tampa Police Department is because you felt they were understaffed?
One of many reasons, but yes.
Okay. Now let's talk about the Cobb Theater. Back on January 13th, you get the call, you're in what sort of vehicle?
A marked patrol car.
And are you in uniform?
Yes, sir.
And what do you do when you get to the theater?
When I was arriving on scene at the theater, I could see people flagging me down from the back. So I went to the back of the theater. I knew the other units had gone in through the front.
So you were not the first law enforcement unit to arrive?
No, sir.
Do you know who else was there when you arrived?
Deputy Federico, Sergeant Greiner, Deputy Robarts, and Deputy Bunner.
All right, and later on, did you learn whether or not those individuals were actually the entry team?
Yes, later on I learned, well, I don't believe Federico was part of the entry team. I think he stayed out front, but the other three were.
So were you, to your understanding, were you or were you not one of the first non-initial entry team responders to arrive at the theater?
Correct.
And you were describing that you drove, what, around, you talked about emergency exits, so we talking about the rear part of the theater?
Yes, sir.
And when you got there, you just described that people were flagging you down.
Right.
What did you do?
I went in through the back of the theater. Fire rescue was coming, so I went and got them. When I looked in the theater, I saw that they were taking him into custody and it was safe for fire rescue to come in.
Okay.
I went and flagged down fire rescue and brought them in.
And so I can understand, I want to take you step by step. When you get there, people are flagging you down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what do? Do you park your vehicle?
Yes.
Get out?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then what do you do? Go into, are you
I
describing?
walk into the rear entrance to the theater tent.
Okay. That's one of the fire exits?
Yes.
And would the exit that you walk into be, as I'm facing the screen, on the right or on the left?
It would be on the right.
Okay. When you go into the theater, you described that they were taking Mr. Reeves away?
Yeah, they had gotten him in custody. They were moving him through the aisles, I remember.
And did you make any observations of Mr. Reeves at that time?
He said it was hurting him to move in the way that they were moving him because of the
I'm going to
seats.
object, that's non-responsive. The question was, did you make any observations, not what did the defendant say? I'd ask that to be stricken.
Well, the observation she made was exactly that he was saying these things. It's not offered.
It's a statement, it's not an observation.
all right. It was, here's, say, I'm not hearing any exception, and I disregard it.
Okay, let me ask it to you this way. When you arrived, were you aware that when the entry team had arrived? In other words, had the entry team arrived very shortly before you got there?
Correct.
And when you got to the theater, was the emergency vehicles even there yet?
The patrol cars?
Emergency vehicles, fire engines?
So you're speaking of fire rescue, because
Yes.
there's different kinds, so I wanted to clarify. Fire rescue is not there yet.
Okay, so you beat fire rescue.
Yes.
You just testified you were the first individual on the scene.
Objection, ask and answer.
I'm laying a predicate. For excited utterance. Judge, he just got arrested, so his excited utterance or spontaneous statement has to do with the arrest. That's the event that he's commenting on, saying that his shoulders hurt.
Where are we at here? I mean, I didn't hear an objection as to hearsay again.
I'm objecting that it's
Asked
not.
and answered is what I heard.
Him trying to lay a predicate for this, whether it's an excited utterance now, it was quite some time afterwards that they arrested him. And it's not about the event, it's them trying to backdoor some issue regarding his arthritis, I'm assuming, which is irrelevant at this point with this witness.
Judge,
So it's not a statement about the event, It's a statement about his medical condition, which they've already provided evidence to.
Well, Judge,
So I'm going to object to her testifying to that because it's hearsay. I don't believe that that is what the excited utterance exception to 803 was all about. So,
All right, so where are you headed with this? First of all, you asked her, you indicated she was the first, you were the first responder on scene, correct? And,
well, because I did ask her the question, I was trying to lay the predicate. Let me say this about what the state said in their comments. The statement that Mr. Reeves makes concerning his pain certainly fits under then existing mental, emotional, or physical conditions, section 90.803, sub 3. He's describing a physical sensation.
I think we all know that that is when we are trying to elicit that testimony from a medical professional that the defendant or whatever witness has sought out for treatment for a condition. We can come in, we can have the doctor testify that he said he was experiencing these types of issues. Not for a hearsay statement that happened as they're trying to elicit. I object, it's hearsay, it is not an exception to any of these situations they're trying to bring out. It's not excited utterance, it's not a then existing medical condition, because that is not what that exception was crafted for. Not for a deputy or an officer to come in and testify to what the defendant might have said when he was being handcuffed or walked away.
Judge,
I object.
And I appreciate that. Judge, if we're going to talk about what rules are crafted for, the hearsay rule is crafted to try to weed out statements that are going to be unreliable because of certain circumstances. For instance, if somebody has enough time to make something up, it's going to be hearsay. I mean, that's the gut reaction part of it. So in this kind of a case where, as he's passing, Mr. Reeves has no reason to make up that, ow, I'm in pain, you're hurting me. There's no reason for him to have fabricated this previously and just have spouted that as he's passing then Corporal Gillot. So any kind of indicia of unreliability is not present in this situation.
all right, we can spend more time arguing about it. Obviously, I've already heard what we're trying to keep out. I need to know, though, for procedural purposes, where there is a lacking predicate. From what I heard, she's just walked in the back door, and I know now where the back door must be, way down here, and Mr. Reeves was sitting in his seat way up here. So, did he shout that, or was she up there? I need a predicate. I'm going to overrule as far for the moment, based on the hearsay exception of then existing medical condition. I know she's not the first responder as far as medical stuff goes, but I'm gonna overrule for other reasons, as Mr. Michaels indicated. I'm not concerned that this is going to be a faulty statement or misconstrued or somehow unreliable. So, set the predicate.
All right, let me show, if I may, let me show you, Officer, what's been marked as court exhibit number 7. It's a photograph. Show off the group. And she- 7, please. It's a picture of the inside of the theater, officer. It's already been entered in evidence. We can take a look at it and help understand where you were and where you saw Mr. Reeves. It's JPEG 2081418. All right. Looking at a photograph that's been entered into evidence, do you recognize that photograph, the area it depicts?
Yes, sir.
And is that a fair and accurate depiction of what Theater 10 looked like the day of January 13, 2014?
Yes, it is.
Now, if you could, I know we don't see the exit doors, but Judge, may I have the officer step down, please? If you would step down, please. And point out to the court where the exit door was approximately that you entered the theater.
It would have been over here.
Okay. So we're looking towards the back of the theater, and you're indicating with your left arm kind of the left side. Is that right?
Yes.
And once you entered through that door, what did you do? Did you look around the theater, or tell me how you proceeded?
I didn't go very far because I was hollering out to another deputy coming out to go get fire rescue, and he wanted to go in. And I had seen that they were bringing out Mr. Reeves this way, like up in here. And I was at the entrance, that back entrance. And then I left again to go get fire rescue and bring him in.
And where do you hear Mr. Reeves make the comment that you testified to earlier?
He was being brought out right around here. And, there's some issues with seating and stuff, being brought out backwards, so
All right, so,
he had some discomfort.
all right, would you sit down, please? So describe what you saw. You're at the bottom of the theater, you're looking up, you see that Mr. Reeves is in custody, you describe how Mr. Reeves was being pulled out of the back row.
Awkwardly. I mean, it's difficult because he's a large guy. The deputies were all large guys, so everybody was just kind of trying to get him out of there. And I remember he was making some noise to the effect of that it was uncomfortable for him. I remember that.
So they were sounds that made you, gave you the impression that he was in pain. I'm speaking of Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Now, when you say the officers are large, I remember Sergeant Griner. How tall is Sergeant Griner?
Oh, 6'7" maybe. He's a big guy.
And that was one of the officers you described who had hands on Mr. Reeves.
Yes,
And at that point, could you see if Mr. Reeves was handcuffed or not?
he was.
And where was he handcuffed?
Judge, I'm going to object to the relevance of all this.
She asked for me to lay a predicate, Judge.
For time purposes, not the size of the officer and where he was handcuffed and things of that nature.
And Judge, it's relevant because certain patrons have made comments that they observed certain expressions on Mr. Reeves' face. And, part of this testimony is so that if we do get that testimony, if that's what the government chooses to present, then certainly now we have somebody who's going to explain what they may see as a grimace or a mean look or an angry look with somebody who's yelling because they're being dragged out by a 6'7" police officer as a 71-year-old.
I'll overrule.
Okay. So describe, they had Mr. Reeves, you said he was handcuffed behind his back, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that's procedure.
Right.
And tell me, were they behind Mr. Reeves, or how were they getting him out of the aisle?
It's difficult to remember. In all fairness, I was more concerned about the victim at that point once I knew he was secured. So I really wanted to get fire rescue in.
I understand, but you did observe that Mr. Reeves was being pulled out backwards through the aisle.
And I heard,
Objection asked and answered.
I didn't hear the answer, so I'll overrule.
Okay, he was being pulled out backward?
either backwards or sideways. It looked like, I remember he yelled something to the effect that it was uncomfortable for him.
Now, your main concern, of course, is Mr. Olson now.
Yes, sir.
And so you described you wanted to get fire rescue there. What did you do to make that happen?
I got back in my car, threw it in reverse, jumped out, flagged him down, and brought him back.
Now, when you first got in the theater, I understand there's a lot going on because the call was a hot call.
Yes, sir.
You're seeing somebody being arrested and you see somebody that's obviously injured. Do you have a chance to notice whether or not there are any patrons around, civilians?
There were people in the theater.
At that point, can you estimate how many you saw?
10 or 11 that I can think of. I mean, that's just a guesstimation.
When you got to the theater and walked inside initially, do you remember what the lighting was like?
I don't.
Was it pitch black or were you able to see someone?
No, because that back door was open. I remember that created some light. And I'm not sure if they had turned the theater lights on yet at that point or not.
Now you flagged down the emergency personnel, the medical personnel. What is the next thing you do?
Went inside, basically just surveyed the scene to try and figure out where it actually happened at within the theater.
Okay. Survey that, I know what it means if you're looking at landlines and all that, but what do you mean when you talk about surveying the scene in this case?
Taking it all in, just looking at the entire scene and trying to figure out what do I have, where did it happen.
And what is your vantage point of this surveying of the scene?
At first from the bottom of the scene, looking up at all of the chairs. And then I believe I went up around the right side because I knew things had happened somewhere near the left, or at least that the defendant had been walked through in the area.
And what was the purpose of going up the right side and not going right through where everybody was coming?
Because that's where everybody was coming.
Okay. And did you also do it to, you can answer yes or no, I don't know the answer. Did you also do it to preserve the potential crime scene?
Yes, sir.
Because you know that's very important.
It is, yes.
Now you've done your survey, you called for medical personnel. Are there still people in the theater at this point?
Yes.
And so what do you do?
I moved them to the lower level and got everybody had kind of moved anyway because fire rescue had come in, the defendant was being taken out, so everybody had sort of congregated on that, what would be facing this picture, our right side, by the yellow handrails there.
Could you, if you don't mind, I hate to make you get up and down, but if you could, Nation Judge, thank you. If you would, show the court what area you're talking about.
Right around here, everybody was gathered and in here.
Now, had those people gathered there on their own, or did you provide some instruction to go over there?
Little of both. I'm sure that I wanted to get everyone together.
And what was the purpose of doing that?
I wanted to actually get them all together so I could get them separated. I wanted to hand out statements and get them busy.
Okay. And that's interesting that you would say that. You said you put them together so that you can get them separated.
I had to get everybody together to explain to them, I'm going to give you guys statements. I know you've been through a really traumatic event. Please stay separated. And then I can get to work on this crime scene.
And do you remember how many people were there?
I don't. Like I said, there was maybe 10 or 11 or more.
Does the number 15 or 20 sound
That's
unbelievable?
absolutely possible.
Now, when you say you put them in a section together, show us the section you put them in.
Well, I knew it had happened over here. There was stuff, I'd seen on the ground, so I wanted to...
And that's
go-
the left side of the theater as you're
Yeah,
looking to the back
yeah.
wall.
So I wanted to rope this all off. I would prefer to have just kept them out of this entire theater, but there was nowhere else for me to put them because the movie theater itself had not been evacuated. So the best I could do with this whole thing being mine at that moment was put them in here writing statements. And
Okay.
where I could watch them and still put up crime scene tape and look at what I actually have.
All right, so you're showing us, you wanted to keep them out of that top section because that's where it apparently took
Yes, sir.
place, the event, right?
Yes, sir.
And you showed us that as we're looking towards the back of the theater, in the lower right quadrant, kind of,
Here?
yes.
Okay.
Is that where you put them?
Here,
Okay.
like here.
All right, the last 3 rows or so?
Yeah, closer to the yellow bars. I didn't want them too far from me, but I wanted them to be separated in seats and writing and busy.
Okay, you can have a seat, please. Now, you said, you testified that the scene was all yours. What do you mean by that?
At the moment, the entry team had taken the suspect. There were officers who had gone with the victim. I did have a couple other deputies come in and help me out by getting pens or more statements. But for the most part, I was in control of Theater 10 until all of the detectives arrived.
Okay, so you're in control of the crime scene, are you?
Yes, sir.
You're in control of the potential witnesses, are you?
Yes.
you're in control of making sure or trying to make sure that nobody comes in or goes out without you knowing it.
Right, that was covered by Deputy Bunner and I believe Deputy Gene Smith. Deputy Bunner was at the front, I couldn't see him, and Gene Smith would have been in the back.
Okay. Now, you hand these individuals testimony, voluntary statement forms, I think they're called, right?
Yes, sir.
And you tell them what?
Fill out the statement to the best of your ability, what you saw and what you heard.
Agree or disagree, there was nobody to watch these people to see whether they talk to each other or not?
The entire time?
Yes.
No.
And so, do you know whether people talk to one another while they were filling out their forms?
I thought I was doing an excellent job of keeping them from talking to one another until I collected the statements.
And so tell me about that. What about collecting the statements makes you say that you thought you were doing a great job with your work?
A married couple had the exact same written statement.
I'm approaching you with what has been marked as defense exhibit number 50. May I, Judge?
Amen.
I want you to take a look at that. You could?
Mm-hmm.
Do you recognize those two
do.
statement forms?
Yes.
And is that a fair and accurate representation of what you saw on that day?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Judge, at this time, I would move defense exhibit number 50 into evidence.
Any objection?
None wrong with that.
No objection.
May I approach the clerk?
Amen.
I lost track of the number. This one is number 25, defense exhibit number
Is
25.
that a composite?
It is, Your Honor. May I approach the witness?
Amen.
You have this number 25, it's a composite. There are two voluntary statement forms. The one on top has whose name on it?
Luis Perez.
And what is the statement that's written on that form?
I heard someone say, "Get out of my face," then a shot.
And can you read the signature at the bottom?
I can see the printed name of Luis Perez.
Okay. And is there a second form as part of that exhibit?
Yes.
And is that also the Pasco County Sheriff's Office voluntary statement form?
Yes, it is.
And are those two the forms that you handed out that day in the theater?
Yes, copies
And-
of them.
I'm sorry?
Copies of them, yes.
Copies. And what does that statement say?
You want me to
Don't
read
object
it?
to relevance. If
I'm
it's,
sorry,
Hang on
let's
just a
have a moment.
we object to relevance. we did not object to these composite statements coming in because we know that they're trying to argue contamination. This is hearsay. They can't then try to come in and have this believe that this is for the truth of the matter asserted. We object to any line. We let it in. It speaks for itself. There's no need for him to cross-examine what's on the statement itself. He can ask about the logistics of how she came into possession of it. But the similarities and all that, they speak for themselves.
Judge, well, if they speak for themselves, then there shouldn't be any problem with this witness testifying about it. And certainly, they didn't object to it coming into evidence. I'm having her describe the evidence that came in for the court and simply read the form. I haven't heard a legal objection. It's not relevant. They didn't object to it coming into.
It's not relevant
evidence.
under the purposes which he's arguing, Judge. We're asking for you to make a ruling that this is for the limited purpose of contamination only. The facts of what's on that is irrelevant with this witness.
The fact of what's on them is relevant for exactly the point that the state is saying I'm trying to make, which is that there is witness contamination.
He's trying to backdoor this statement, which is something that cannot be attributed to the speaker at this point. So this is not the correct witness with which for him to do this.
Well, that sounds like an objection to them being entered, and they didn't object, Judge, so I think the horse is out of the barn on that one.
All right, they have been entered. There was no limitations put on their admission. I understand clearly the argument at this point as far as the content of the statement themselves.
But again, Judge, if we're talking about witness contamination, the content of the statement may very well be relevant at a later point in time, and they're definitely relevant now because we're talking about two people making the same statement, so we have to know what the statements are to determine whether they're the same or not.
There's no question that the content is hearsay. But obviously the argument is it came in to show that they were the same statement. As far as direct examination as to the content, obviously they're in, I'm gonna see them. So I don't know that it matters significantly other than there's no real purpose to continue with the line of questioning as to what they said other than to prove that they were the same. So I'll sustain to some extent and overrule to some extent as well with that explanation.
All right. And Your Honor, may I approach the witness just so I can go over the statement forms with her? Thank you. Okay. Officer, let's look at, I'm going to separate them briefly with the court's permission. I'll restaple them. And I'm going to put both statements side by side for you. On your left is at the very top, without a
Objection to him testifying, Judge. He can ask the witness what one's on the left.
Judge, it's a long-winded question I'm about to ask when I have to set up my question.
Go ahead, all over.
The one on the left at the very top, there's a name. What is that name?
Louis Perez?
At the very top of the one on your right, there's a name, and what is that name?
Gladys Perez?
Now, I don't know whether you're a handwriting expert or not, let me ask you, are you?
No.
But in your eye, as a regular person, does the handwriting look the same for both of those?
Yes.
I'm going to object to him asking her that.
Oh, well.
Hopefully people can test it. Now, let's look at the first word. Without saying it, is the first word the same on Lewis's form and on Gladys's form?
Yes.
Okay. The second word, is it the same on Lewis's form and Gladys's form?
Yes.
And I forgot to ask you, but the handwriting for the first word, is that the same on both forms?
Yes.
The same for the second word, same on both forms?
Yes.
The third word, is that the same on Lewis's form as it is on Gladys's form?
Yes.
Again, the handwriting, does it look similar to you
It does.
or identical to you?
Similar, yes.
Okay, now this is the fourth word, is it the same?
Yes.
And again, the handwriting, is it similar or the same?
Similar?
The next word,
Yes,
The same?
yes,
And also looks similar or identical?
yes,
The very next word the same?
yes, sir.
And both in the actual word itself and how it's written?
Mm-hmm.
The next word, the same, right?
The same. Mm-hmm.
Handwriting and how it's written
Mm-hmm.
and what it says.
Yes,
The next word the same?
yes,
The following word the same?
yes,
Both of those are in the similar handwriting, you agree with me?
yes,
Okay. The very next word the same?
yes,
And again, a very unusual T, it's the same in both words, you'd agree with me on that. They're similar, whether it's unusual or not.
I suppose.
Okay. The next word the same?
Yes,
Written in a similar fashion?
yes, sir.
And the same with the last word?
Yes,
Now, there's an address written down, it's the same address on both forms. Again, that address is written in the same or substantially similar handwriting, would you agree? Or
yes,
disagree? Okay, and the same with the telephone number?
yes,
Okay. Now, you testified earlier that you thought you did a good job until you saw essentially that form, is that right?
that's right.
And tell me why that caused you concern.
It frustrated me because that meant that one of them had filled out the statement for the other.
And so, what did that tell you? Would you agree or disagree with me that that is symptomatic of something larger, which is witness contamination?
Depth to speculation.
Judge, she's testified to her training and certainly,
Oh,
okay. Would you agree or disagree that that's symptomatic of potential witness contamination?
You would have to ask them specifically, only because I've had both situations where maybe somebody said, here, just fill this out, without necessarily discussing the incident.
Okay.
So you would have to ask them specifically. I can't answer for them on that.
But certainly you had concern for that issue after seeing this.
Yes,
And you would depend upon the detective, whoever you hand it off to make inquiries into that issue, right?
yes.
And did this also not tell you that really you weren't exactly supervising him, because you didn't see this, did you?
Right, I can't unfortunately watch 15 people write a statement at the same time.
And would you agree or disagree that the scene was kind of chaotic because of the lack of people that responded, initially anyway?
It was chaotic because it was such a large scene.
Now, at some point, did you contact Detective Short to talk to him about perhaps moving some witnesses?
I don't remember if I contacted him, or I believe he might have come to me. Detectives started flooding in, all kinds of people came, and the detectives, like in any case, will take over your scene.
Okay. And what was the purpose of moving people? Is that to separate them?
Just to maintain the crime scene even better. And possibly, you would have to ask Detective Short, but I know our main concern was getting him out of that theater initially, Theater 10.
And do you agree or disagree with me that ideally it would be advantageous to separate potential witnesses to a criminal event?
Yes,
Or
very
to a
much.
potential criminal event?
Yes, sir.
And that is so that they don't talk to each other, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And why is it important that individuals not speak to each other concerning what they think they saw, or what they heard or think they heard?
Because they can change each other's minds on what they saw or heard.
And in your experience, is that any more acute in a situation where people have witnessed a dramatic or traumatic kind of a scene?
That I can't answer to, I'm not sure.
Were people upset when you got to the theater?
They were.
May I have a moment?
you may.
Now, once you finished in the theater, what was your next action? What were your next duties at the movie theater?
I took Deputy Bunner's spot at the front door to Theater 10, from inside the theater.
And what were you doing there?
Just maintaining the crime scene log.
And let's talk a little bit about that. When you got there, you said Lieutenant Brunner?
I don't know if he's a lieutenant now, a deputy, I believe, at the time.
Okay, Deputy Brunner, was maintaining a crime scene log.
Yes, sir.
And what is that? How is that done?
It's a log. It says the case number and the date and time and the names of the people who entered and exited the scene.
Okay. And let me show you what's been marked as defense exhibit number 49, if I may. Oh, no, you're going away. There you are. Take a look at that, please.
If we could see that.
Oh, I apologize.
So I'm going to object to relevance of this crime scene log at this point. She already indicated that she maintained a crime scene log. That document that they had other crime scene logs of other officers, so he has omitted those pictures. But at this point, there's no relevance into the crime scene log. And there is no exception to the hearsay rule. It's hearsay. It's things that are written down for the truth of the matter asserted.
Response?
Your Honor, the crime scene log has to do with work that the then corporal performed at the scene. The testimony that we expect to elicit from the corporal is that she got there, that this other officer was keeping a crime log, that it was kind of sloppy, so she had, there was a lot of time she was sitting there. She rewrote it and threw the original crime log away. And certainly, we're not trying to reflect poorly on this officer, but in terms of the overall investigation, it has a lot to do with how the investigation was handled. So,
And Judge, that's our objection. The purpose of this hearing is to determine whether or not Mr. Reeves was reasonable in his actions on that day. With regard to this investigation, something that happened after the shootings, irrelevant for your purposes. We object. We want it kept out.
Judge, if we had a beautiful HD video, which we wish we did in this case, then we wouldn't be here having this hearing. Part of the hearing is we bear the burden of proving it at this point. Not that I think that that's proper, but that's what the law is now, and I understand that. And so we should be afforded every opportunity to prove our burden. And so one of the issues is how the crime scene was handled. And it's important because we have to see what evidence was preserved and potentially what evidence was lost. And certainly the court can consider that when the court considers testimony from individuals who gathered certain evidence and certain evidence that may have been present that we don't have, or potential witness statements that weren't captured properly. So all that is food for the court's thought on what kind of evidence was gathered, and therefore what kind of evidence the court should consider. We have our own crime scene investigator coming up, an expert in the field, and so I think those things are important to get the overall picture to determine, yeah, one side is Mr. Reeves and his perception. The other side, though, is what else do we have out there? So for that reason, it's relevant, and I think she should be able to testify, the officer should be able to testify, and I think it comes in as evidence.
And Judge, that's the problem with this. I agree. It's their burden of proof. What the argument is he's making, he's trying to prove something with a negative. If we had a jury seated here and we were looking at the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, and he was trying to cast doubt on the investigation, that's one thing. But all you have to determine is whether or not he was reasonable in his actions. He can't get proof through a negative of what wasn't done or what should have been done. So for the purposes of this hearing, where they have the burden of proof to show that Mr. Reeves' actions were reasonable, this doesn't come in. He can't meet his burden by showing negatives. That would be if we were at the jury trial stage where we're looking at reasonable doubt and we have a jury to consider that. So we're getting far afield from what the purpose of this hearing is and what the court's role is and what the defendant's role is in this particular incident.
The big picture, Judge, here is this old man sitting here, this retired police captain sitting here is the accused in this case. We can never lose sight that he's the accused. He's the defendant. The government is prosecuting Mr. Reeves. And so we're in some kind of a hybrid hearing where the Florida State Legislature somehow decided that they don't have the burden and that we do. We don't all of a sudden lose sight of who the accused is and who gets the benefit of the doubt here. If the prosecutor's saying that if this were a jury trial, it would come in, it should come in here too, because he's also facing the same penalties he would in a jury trial.
Judge, I'm going to object to Mr. Escobar.
Judge,
Hold on, stop.
Judge, it affects part of my presentation as well, is what she's doing. I'm not getting involved in individual presentations because I understand the court's rule. But the minute that it starts affecting my presentation, my
All right,
witnesses...
you'll get a minute.
Okay,
It's Mr. Michaels is arguing this issue. We only do one at a time.
I understand.
What I want to know, and you're welcome to confer, but we only do one at a time. And right now, it's Mr. Michaels and Ms. Sumner. The objection on the table is as to the relevance of this whole line of questioning. Mr. Michaels, tell me how it is relevant to the issue at hand.
It's relevant because the issue at hand can only be considered by the court based on the evidence that's presented to the court. The evidence in this case is coming from a couple different places. The evidence that's coming to the court is evidence, number one, that's gathered by law enforcement, initially and later on. The other evidence, the court has already heard a bunch of it, is from expert testimony and other witnesses, both lay and law enforcement witnesses. So because part of the evidence that the court is to consider is coming from evidence and statements and things gathered by law enforcement, it's relevant to show that if law enforcement didn't do a great job in preserving it for whatever reason, then that should be taken into consideration when the court hears from our experts, for instance, or the court considers the credibility or reliability of the testimony of one of the state's witnesses, or even one of our witnesses. The reason this is important is because the destroyed crime scene log wasn't retained. So if, for instance, and I'm not suggesting that I have any evidence of this, but if, for instance, there was a handwriting error or an error of an entry of some sort, and certainly the state can cross-examine the officer and she can say, no, I was real careful and I wrote it down. I was just trying to make it neat so people could read it so I can preserve evidence. Okay, that's what they get, but that's why it's relevant, Judge.
In a nutshell, are you saying that it goes to the credibility of the witnesses and the evidence?
Yes, Judge.
All right. Under those circumstances, it's almost always relevant. I'm going to overrule with that explanation.
Okay. Now, this is defense exhibit number 50. May I approach? Thank you. All right. Showing you what's been marked as for our defense identification purposes, number 50. And you've already heard a lot about it, Officer Jalad. Do you recognize that?
I do.
Okay, and is that your handwriting?
Yes, sir.
And is that a log that you created?
Yes.
Now, were you the originator of that log?
Can you rephrase? I'm not
In
sure.
other
I
words,
understand.
when you took over the post to keep the log, were you the first one there?
No.
Did you start the log?
No, sir.
So there was already an existing log?
There was.
All right. And did you rewrite that log?
I did.
And why did you do that?
To make it more legible.
So the other officer had bad handwriting? Or not as good as yours? Let me ask you this. Did you preserve a copy of the crime scene log that you destroyed?
No.
Judge, at this time, I would like to move into evidence defense. It's number 50 for the defense.
Objection hearsay, there is no exception.
Response?
Judge, this isn't being offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted. This isn't being offered to prove that Mr. Smith, the first responder, entered in at 1340 and left at a different time. The purpose of this is exactly what we talked about, because it has a bearing on the credibility of witnesses, the evidence the court's going to receive. You've heard the testimony. This isn't about whether or not this individual entered at a certain time or not. It may become, later on, that may become relevant, but at this time it's being offered for the statement that was presented.
Judge, then he needs to establish what witnesses are affected by this and what evidence was affected by this. He can't do that. He even said that. He says, I don't even know if it's going to become an issue. But, so for that purpose, it's irrelevant, it's hearsay, and he's not laid a proper predicate for the issues that he's trying to have this court believe it to be. And again, Judge, he's trying to prove a negative, and we're getting far afield of what the purpose of this hearing is.
Judge, in the interest of streamlining things at this time, I won't offer it into evidence. The court has heard the testimony, but I will ask to staple exhibit number 25 if I may approach the clerk.
To staple those two documents together, that composite, is that what he's trying to do?
Yeah.
Your Honor, I'm going to show the prosecutor what I'm doing. May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Amen.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ross?
1 minute, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Officer July.
Good afternoon.
All right, so it's hood, it's probably still good morning. You indicated that you were with Pasco County Sheriff's Office for approximately 15 years, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And the reasons you left Pasco County Sheriff's Office were what?
Just better pay and opportunities at Tampa, more opportunities for advancement, more manpower.
Personal reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you indicated that you were the first non-entry team officer to arrive on scene, is that correct?
At the back door, yes.
At the back door. So there were other officers around. You had indicated, correct me if I'm wrong, Deputy Gondik, Sergeant Griner, Deputy Smith, a Detective Schuler, Deputy Robarts, Deputy Federico, Deputy Bunner,
Yes, ma'am.
right? So there were a number of law enforcement officers there at that time. Who
Right.
indicated to you that you would set up the crime scene?
No one.
Okay. You took it upon yourself to do that?
Yes, ma'am.
Were other people involved in other aspects of the investigation at that
Correct.
point?
Correct.
You indicated that Deputy Bunner was at the front door. Are you talking about the door where the patrons would enter the theater?
Yes, the entrance to Theater 10. from
And then they
inside
would
the
come
theater.
in and pick which side they wanted to go down?
Yes, ma'am.
And you indicated Deputy Smith at some point was at the back door.
Right.
Are you calling that the emergency exit door?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you indicated that there were anywhere from 10 to 15 people, patrons, in the theater when you arrived?
Yes, ma'am.
And is it the fact that you did tell them not to discuss the case amongst themselves?
Correct.
And in fact, you indicated that you were trying to keep an eye on them. We saw that picture in that area where the yellow railing was, right? That was what you had considered to be the crime scene. That's what you cordoned off, correct?
Right. I wanted them as close to me as possible without contaminating the crime scene.
So you put them not within the crime scene, but without, on the other side of the crime scene,
Correct.
correct? And you indicated that you tried to get them seated in the first couple rows of that bottom section of the theater so that they could start working, getting busy, were your words,
Right.
so that they wouldn't discuss the case.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
And you then had your back to them, or maybe you were rolling tape out this way as you're watching them in front of you.
Exactly.
How long of a period do you believe that you were in there with them?
If I had to guess, I would say half hour to an hour.
And you indicated that you had to keep them in that Theater 10 because at that point, the rest of the theater had not yet been evacuated, correct?
Correct.
And you wanted to cordon off the crime scene to prevent anybody else from coming in and contaminating it.
Yes, ma'am.
So you felt that you had to do those two things at the same time, simultaneously.
Correct.
Now, you indicated that you got these statements back from them, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you looked through all the statements, didn't you?
Briefly, yes.
Okay. And are the only two statements that you saw that appeared to be the same, identical, or similar were the two from the Perez's?
Yes.
And isn't it true that you don't know under what circumstances these two statements came to be similar or the same?
Correct.
And when you handed over these statements, to whom did you hand them over?
I believe it was Detective Short,
Detective Short?
or possibly his sergeant, Sergeant Luby Fields.
Okay. So one of those two gentlemen, you handed over a pack of statements from the 10 to 15 witnesses that you had just cordoned off
Yes,
and
ma'am.
sat in those first two rows, that you were watching them. Did you overhear any of these witnesses talking amongst themselves about the events that they observed?
No.
Did you advise either Detective Short or Sergeant Luby, look, here's the statements, these two are similar or the same?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any redirect?
Yes, thank you. As you sit here today, can you give us the names of all the witnesses that were there in that section?
No, sir.
Can you give me the names of 5 witnesses that were there?
No.
3?
No, sir.
Okay. 2, not counting the Perez's?
No, sir.
Now, you said you looked at the Perez's, and that's pretty obvious because they both look exactly alike, right?
The Perez's look exactly
Yes.
alike?
Their statement forms.
Oh, I thought you meant them literally.
No, not the people.
Yes.
Did you do any examination of the other statements, like a kind of a spreadsheet to see this person was sitting next to this person and they both said A? This person was sitting next to this person and they both said A. Did you do any of that sort of analysis?
I briefly looked through all the statements, noticed that the Perez's looked the same, and that was it.
Okay, because that's pretty obvious.
Yes.
Even a cursory view, you'd see that.
Right.
But in terms of where everybody was sitting and whether the guy sitting in seat number 1 was the same as the guy sitting in seat number 3, in terms of the statement, you have no idea about that.
Correct.
We can agree, though, or if you want, disagree, that when you saw that those two were the same, that alarmed you,
Yes.
and it caused you some concern,
Frustration, yes.
frustration, but concern for the integrity of the witness statements. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Adrian.
You'd agree with me that two people observing the same thing could document it in the same way, right?
Objection, speculation?
Doesn't mean that it's contamination, right?
Correct.
Objection, speculation?
I'll overrule. Anything further from this witness?
No, Your Honor, and as far as the defense is concerned, the officer may be released.
Dave?
We'd ask her that she still be under subpoena.
Okay. You're free to go today, and, but still under subpoena, there is a possibility that you may be recalled.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Who's next?
Your Honor, our next witness we anticipate calling is Mrs. Reeves. It's not going to be a short one where it's 20 of 12. I'd rather not be in a situation where we have her testimony broken up. I don't think it's fair to Mr. Reeves. I don't think it's fair to the witness. So I would ask that we take an early lunch, come back and get started early, and proceed. And I also need a little time to set up a video for Mrs. Reeves as well.
All right. What are we looking at? 1 o'clock return time?
That would be perfect, thank you.
All right, and we'll go ahead and take a recess at this time. We'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
All right.